Why was she running at 3 in the morning when everyone else was asleep? The treadmill hummed, a high-pitched whine, like a mechanical mosquito burrowing into the silence of forward operating base Bravo. It was 300 Zulu, the dead hour, when the night pressed down on Afghanistan like a thumb on a bruise, and the only people awake were the ones on guard duty or the ones who couldn't sleep because of what lived behind their eyelids. The gym was a corrugated metal box that trapped heat during the day and exhaled cold during the night. It smelled like old sweat, rubber mats, and CLP gun oil, the kind of smell that got into your pores and never really left. Sergeant Alina Ash Vance stared at the digital display. Speed, 18.5 kilometers per hour. Distance, 12 kilometers. Her legs were pistons. Efficient. Brutal. She wore a loose gray Army PT shirt soaked through with sweat, clinging to a frame that looked too slight for the heavy combat load required of a cultural support team member attached to special operations. She didn't run for fitness. She ran to outpace the memories that lived in the nerve endings of the scar tissue wrapping around the right side of her neck like a strangler's hand. The burn was old, 3 years, a VBIED in Aleppo, vehicle-borne improvised explosive device. The military loved acronyms because they sanitized the horror, made the fire sound clinical, made the screaming sound like statistics. But in the dry heat of Afghanistan, the scar felt tight, pulling at her jaw with every heavy breath. It was a topographical map of fused skin, purple and white, shiny in some places, rough in others. A constant reminder that she had survived something that should have killed her. The gym door groaned open. A wedge of yellow floodlight cut through the gloom, followed by the heavy bootfalls of men who walked like they owned the gravity around them. Team 7, the SEAL platoon she had been assigned to for the upcoming rotation. Alina didn't break stride. She focused on the rhythm. Left, right, breathe. Left, right, ignore. Christ, looks like the hamster wheel is occupied. The voice was deep, resonant, arrogant. That was Miller, the heavy weapons specialist, the kind of man who believed that volume equaled authority. Check the display, another voice muttered. She's been on that thing for an hour at that pace. Alina felt their eyes. It was a physical sensation, a prickling heat on the right side of her neck where the scar was most visible. She knew what they saw, a woman, 5'6", barely 130 pounds, with a face half ruined by fire, a liability, a token attachment mandated by brass to search local women, useless in a firefight. She reached for the console, her fingers trembling slightly, not from fatigue, but from the adrenaline spike of being watched. She punched the speed up, 20 kilometers per hour, the machine whirred louder, protesting. Lieutenant Kalen Thorne stepped into her peripheral vision. He didn't speak immediately, he just watched. Thorne was a monolith of a man, quiet, lethal, with eyes that assessed threats and assets in microseconds. Alina knew she had already been categorized. Asset, questionable. Reliability, unknown. "You're going to blow a gasket, Sergeant," Thorne said. His voice wasn't mocking. It was flat, clinical, save it for the patrol. Alina kept her eyes forward, locking onto a rusted bolt on the wall. "I'm fine, sir." Her voice was steady despite her heart hammering at 180 beats per minute. "We need the machines," Miller added, stepping closer. He smelled of chewing tobacco and aggression. "Ooper hours, move it." It was a test. It was always a test. If she moved, she submitted. If she argued, she was emotional. Alina didn't stop. She didn't look at Miller. She simply maintained the sprint, her boots striking the belt with a rhythmic thud, thud, thud that sounded like suppressed gunfire. The display ticked over, 13 kilometers. She had run on a broken ankle once. She had run with shrapnel in her hip. She could run until Miller got bored. The silence in the gym stretched, filled only by the aggressive slap of her shoes and the desperate whine of the motor. 1 minute, 2 minutes. Miller crossed his arms, waiting for her to falter. Thorne watched her mechanics, the lack of wasted motion, the way her head stayed perfectly level despite the speed. 3 minutes at a dead sprint. Alina's vision blurred at the edges. The burned scar felt like it was splitting open. The phantom heat of the Aleppo fire licking at her ear. Don't stop. If you stop, you die. The voice in her head was her own. But it was also the voice of the girl she used to be. Before the fire, before the screaming, before she learned that survival wasn't about being the strongest. It was about being the one who refused to quit. Finally, Miller scoffed, breaking the tension. Whatever, let the freak run herself into the ground. I'll hit the weights. He turned away, the rest of the pack following him to the iron racks. Only Thorn remained for a moment longer. He looked at the scar, then at her eyes. There was no pity in his gaze, only a cold calculation. Briefing at 600, Thorn said, low enough that only she could hear over the machine. Don't be late, Vance. Alina's hand hovered over the emergency stop. She slowed the machine down to a jog, gasping for air, finally turning to face him. Her face was flushed, the scar vivid purple against her pale skin. Sir, she said, her voice hoarse, if I lag behind by 1 meter in the field, you leave me behind. We don't wait for stragglers. Thorn's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, maybe, or respect. Copy that, Sergeant. He turned and walked away. Alina hit the stop button. The silence rushed back in, ringing in her ears. She grabbed her towel, wiping the sweat that stung the sensitive skin of her neck. She looked at the display one last time. 14 kilometers. She wasn't running for fitness. She was running because she knew something Thorn didn't. In the mountains, the bullet doesn't care about your bench press. It only cares if you can move faster than the finger on the trigger. And Alina Vance had spent 3 years learning how to move like a ghost, because ghosts don't burn twice. What do you see when you look at someone scarred? The Tactical Operations Center at FOB Bravo existed in a permanent state of twilight. Blackout curtains taped over reinforced windows killed the aggressive Afghan sun, leaving the room illuminated only by the cool blue wash of projector screens and the glowing instrument panels of communication racks. The air was frigid, conditioned to protect the server stacks rather than the humans, and smelled of stale coffee, ozone, and high-grade anxiety. Sergeant Alina Vance stood in the back near the heavy steel door, her arms crossed over her chest. She had swapped her sweat-soaked PT gear for multicam fatigues. Her hair pulled back into a severe bun that complied with regulation to the millimeter. The burn scar on her neck was hidden beneath the high collar of her combat shirt, but the stiffness in her posture betrayed her awareness of it. At the front of the room, Lieutenant Kalen Thorne stood next to the intelligence officer, a frantic-looking captain named Halloway. The projection on the wall displayed a high-resolution satellite map of the Pech Valley, a jagged tier in the earth surrounded by peaks that reached 6,000 feet. Target compound is here, Halloway said, tapping a laser pointer on a cluster of mud brick structures nestled against the northern slope. Objective is a standard KLE with the village elder Malik. We believe he's hoarding intel on the new rat lines coming in from Pakistan. We go in tea and sympathy, get the names, and get out. Thorne studied the map, his jaw set. Route. Infill by Hello to LZ Alpha. Halloway traced a line to a flat plateau 3 clicks south. Then a foot patrol down into the valley floor. It's open terrain, but we have overwatch from the Reaper drone. Threat level is moderate, mostly localized chatter. Thorne turned to the room, scanning the 6 seals of his element. Gear up heavy. We step off at 1400. Miller, you're on the saw. Davis, point. His eyes swept past Alina, as if she were part of the furniture. Vance, you're with the TOC support team. Monitor the comms from here. The silence that followed was brief but heavy. The other SEALs shifted, sensing the dismissal. It was the safe play. Leave the CSD girl in the air conditioning. Alina stepped forward. Her boots made no sound on the linoleum. Sir, with respect, I'm supposed to be attached to the patrol element. Female engagement protocol. If there are women or children in the compound. There won't be, Thorne cut her off. His tone was neutral but final. Intel says Malik operates alone. No family on site. We don't need FET support for this one. Female Engagement Team. Another acronym. Another way to say, you're here to search women, not to fight. Alina felt the familiar tightness in her chest, the burn scar prickling. She could argue. She could cite the mandate. She could make it uncomfortable for Thorne to exclude her. But that would make her the problem. She nodded once. Understood, sir. Thorne's expression didn't change, but there was a flicker of something. Relief, maybe, that she wasn't going to make this difficult. He turned back to the map. Questions. Miller raised a hand. Rules of engagement. Standard, positive ID. No shots unless fired upon. This is hearts and minds, not a hammer strike. The briefing continued. Alina stopped listening. She focused on the map instead, on the terrain. The valley was a natural funnel, high ridges on both sides, limited egress routes. If the intel was wrong, if the threat level was upgraded, if the T and sympathy turned into an ambush, the team would be boxed in. Her eyes traced the high ground. The northern ridge overlooked the compound, perfect overwatch position. If she were Taliban, that's where she'd put the shooters, but she wasn't on the mission, so it didn't matter what she thought. The briefing ended. The SEALs filed out, already shifting into mission mode. Thorne lingered near the map, studying it with the intensity of a man trying to see the future. Alina approached him. She kept her voice low. Sir, the northern ridge. Has anyone done a terrain analysis on potential sniper hides? Thorne glanced at her. The drone will handle Overwatch. We're covered. Drones have blind spots. Thermal doesn't work well in sun-baked rocks, and if the locals know the Reaper's up, they'll wait until it's repositioning or low on fuel. Thorne's jaw tightened. You think I haven't considered that, Sergeant? I think you're planning for the mission you want, not the mission you might get. It was the wrong thing to say. She saw it immediately. Thorne's expression hardened. You're not cleared for this patrol, Vance. That means you don't have a vote. Stay in your lane. Alina held his gaze for a moment, then she nodded. Yes, sir. She turned and walked out. The door hissed shut behind her. The hallway was bright, fluorescent, sterile. She walked past the armory, past the chow hall, past the rows of plywood bee-huts where soldiers slept in narrow cots and dreamed of home. She walked to her own quarters, a cramped space she shared with two other female soldiers who were currently on a different rotation. She sat on the edge of her bunk and pulled out her notebook. The kind soldiers called a green book, write in the rain, waterproof, indestructible. She sketched the valley from memory, the compound, the ridges, the kill zones. She marked the northern ridge with a red X, then she wrote a single line at the bottom of the page. Sometimes the mission doesn't care if you were invited. She closed the notebook. She checked her watch. 1100 hours, 3 hours until the patrol stepped off. She lay back on the bunk, staring at the ceiling. Her hand drifted to the scar on her neck. She traced the familiar ridges. The memory of the fire was always there, but so was the memory of what came after. The crawl through the rubble, the medic who found her, the helicopter ride where she was certain she was going to die, the hospital where she woke up and realized she was still alive. She had survived because she refused to stop moving, and that was the only math that mattered. But there was something she hadn't told anyone yet, something she had decided in the silence of that gym while Miller mocked her and Thorne watched with cold eyes. If the mission went wrong, if the valley became a kill box, if the team needed someone who could run faster than bullets, she would be there, whether they wanted her or not. Have you ever made a decision that you knew would cost you everything? The Black Hawk's rotors carved the air into violent slices, a percussion that drowned out thought and turned the world into pure vibration. Alina Vance sat on the web seating, wedged between a pallet of water bottles and a stack of ammunition crates. She wasn't supposed to be on this bird. She wasn't on the manifest. She wasn't part of the mission. But 30 minutes ago, she had walked up to the flight line with her full kit, her rifle, and a face that dared anyone to stop her. The loadmaster had looked at her, then at his clipboard, then back at her. "You Vance." "Yes." "You're not on my list." "Check again." He had checked again. She wasn't there. But something in her eyes, or maybe the scar on her neck, made him pause. He glanced at the SEALs already seated in the helicopter, then back at her. "Gear looks good," he said finally. "Find a spot." And that was it. She was on the bird. Thorne hadn't seen her board, or if he had, he'd chosen not to stop her. Maybe he respected the audacity. Maybe he figured she'd wash out on the patrol. Either way, she was airborne now, and there was no going back. The helicopter banked hard, and Alina's stomach lurched. She gripped the webbing, her knuckles white. Through the open door she could see the landscape below. Brown, jagged, hostile. The Hindu Kush mountains rose like the spine of a sleeping dragon, and somewhere down there, in a valley that didn't have a name on most maps, Team 7 was walking into uncertain terrain. The crew chief tapped Thorne on the shoulder and held up 5 fingers. 5 minutes to landing zone. Thorne nodded, then turned to his team. His eyes swept across the SEALs. Miller, Davis, Reyes, Soto, Chen. And then they landed on Alina. For a moment, his face was unreadable. Then he leaned forward, close enough that she could hear him over the rotor wash. "You disobeyed a direct order, Sergeant." Alina met his gaze. "You said stay in my lane, sir. This is my lane." Thorne's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. There wasn't time. The helicopter was descending fast, flaring hard as the pilot brought it into a hover above LZ Alpha. Dust exploded upward, turning the world into a brown fog. "We'll talk about this later," Thorne said. "For now, you stay at the back of the formation. You do not engage unless I give you a direct order. Clear?" "Clear, sir." The wheels touched down. The crew chief shouted, "Go, go, go." The SEALs moved like a machine, fluid and synchronized. Alina followed, her boots hitting the rocky plateau with a jolt that sent pain shooting through her knees. The helicopter lifted off immediately, the rotor wash whipping her hair into her face as the bird climbed back into the sky and disappeared over the ridgeline. And then there was silence, the kind of silence that felt like a held breath, the kind that came before violence. Thorne raised a fist. The team froze. He scanned the terrain, his eyes narrowing. The valley floor was a kilometer below them, accessible only by a narrow goat trail that switched back down the steep slope. The compound was visible in the distance, a cluster of mud brick buildings that looked like they had grown out of the earth. "Davis, take point," Thorne said quietly. "Standard patrol formation, 50-meter intervals. Let's move." The patrol began. Alina fell in at the back just as Thorne had ordered. She watched the ridgelines, the shadows, the dead ground where a man with a rifle could hide and wait. Her instincts screamed at her. This valley was wrong. The terrain was too perfect for an ambush. The high ground dominated everything. If the Taliban were smart, they were already watching. But the patrol moved forward, slow, deliberate, professional. Miller carried the saw, the squad automatic weapon, its barrel sweeping left and right. Soto, the radio operator, stayed close to Thorne, the whip antenna of the SATCOM radio bobbing with each step. They descended into the valley. The temperature rose. The sun beat down like a hammer, and Alina felt the sweat soaking through her shirt. The burn scar on her neck prickled, tight and uncomfortable. She forced herself to breathe evenly, to stay calm. The compound was closer now. They could see details. The wooden doors, the cracked walls, the courtyard where chickens pecked at the dirt. It looked peaceful, almost pastoral, but Alina's gut said otherwise. Thorne raised a fist again. The team halted. He signaled for Davis and Miller to clear the outer perimeter. They moved forward, weapons up, scanning windows and doorways. Alina stayed back, her rifle at low ready, her eyes on the ridgeline. And that's when she saw it. A glint. A brief flash of reflected sunlight from the northern ridge, exactly where she had marked the red X in her notebook. Her heart stopped. She keyed her radio. Thorn, Northern Ridge, possible sniper. Thorn's voice came back immediately. Say again. Northern Ridge, 300 meters up. I saw a reflection. Could be optics. There was a pause. She could almost hear him calculating, deciding whether to trust her or dismiss it as nerves. Reaper's not showing any movement, Soto said, listening to the drone feed. Thermal can miss static targets in sun-baked rocks, Alina said, if they're dug in and not moving. The first shot cracked through the air like a bullwhip. The sound echoed off the valley walls, disorienting, impossible to pinpoint. But Alina had been waiting for it. She had already dropped to one knee, scanning the ridgeline through her optic. Contact Northern Ridge. Thorn's voice was calm, controlled. Suppressive fire, find cover. The valley exploded. Not just one shooter, multiple, at least 5 positions scattered across the high ground. The Taliban had been waiting. They had turned the compound into bait and the valley into a kill zone. Miller opened up with the saw, long bursts that stitched the ridgeline with tracers. Davis and Reyes dove behind a low stone wall. Chen returned fire with disciplined 3-round bursts, but they were pinned, exposed, outgunned. Alina's mind raced. The math was simple. They were in a valley. The enemy held the high ground. Air support was 20 minutes out. Miller was bleeding from a graze wound on his shoulder. Soto was screaming into the radio, calling for immediate extraction. 20 minutes was too long. Someone was going to die. Unless someone changed the equation. Alina looked at the northern ridge. 1 kilometer of open ground, loose shale, no cover. Certain death for anyone who tried to cross it, but there was a dead angle, a fold in the terrain where the ridge curved. If she could get there, if she could climb fast enough, she could flank them. Thorn was shouting orders, his voice cutting through the chaos. Hold position, air support is inbound. But Alina was already moving. She broke from cover and sprinted toward the open ground. Vance, stand down, that's a direct order. She didn't stop. She couldn't, because the math said Miller would bleed out in 6 minutes, and she was the only one who could run fast enough to matter. The radio hissed. Thorn's voice was sharp, disbelieving. She's not moving to cover, she's running straight at them. Alina Vance didn't look back, she just ran, like she had been running for 3 years, outpacing the fire, outpacing the fear. Outpacing death. Can fear be just another variable in the equation? The shale shifted under her boots like ball bearings on concrete. Every step was a calculated risk. Too much pressure and she'd slide. Too little and she'd lose momentum. Alina's lungs burned. Her legs screamed. The 60 pounds of gear on her back felt like it was trying to drag her into the earth. But she didn't stop. The first round snapped past her head, close enough that she felt the displacement of air. The supersonic crack that meant the bullet had missed by inches. The Taliban shooters had seen her. Lone target, moving fast, exposed. Easy kill. Except Alina Vance wasn't running in a straight line. She was serpentining, cutting left then right, using the microterrain to her advantage. A boulder here, a dip in the ground there. She had studied this valley in her notebook. She knew where the dead ground was, where the sight lines broke. Her mind was cold, clinical, processing variables faster than conscious thought. Angle of fire, wind speed, distance to cover, probability of survival. 400 meters to the ridge, 300, the shooting intensified. She could hear Thorn on the radio, his voice tight with a restraint that barely masked fury. Vance, you break cover now and you're pink mist. That's a kilometer of open kill zone. If I stay, your team bleeds out in 6 minutes. Alina gasped into her mic, not breaking stride. I did the math, Lieutenant. Belay that, we hold position. Air support is 20 mics out. Do not, I repeat, do not move. 20 minutes is 19 too many for Miller's femoral artery. She cut the transmission. She needed her breath for running, 200 meters. The fold in the terrain was ahead, a natural depression where the ridge curved inward. If she could reach it, she'd be out of the primary sight lines. She'd have cover. She'd have a chance. 100 meters. A round punched through her pack. She felt the impact like a sledgehammer between her shoulder blades. The hydration bladder exploded, soaking her back with water. But the pack had stopped the bullet. Lucky. So impossibly lucky. 50 meters. She dove. A full sprint into a head-first slide, her body slamming into the rocky depression with enough force to knock the wind out of her lungs. She lay there for 3 seconds, gasping, her vision swimming with black spots. Then training took over. She rolled to her right, bringing her rifle up, scanning for threats. The depression was deeper than it had looked on the map. Good. It gave her a covered approach to the ridgeline. She could see the Taliban positions now. 5 shooters, spread out along the high ground. They were focused on the team below, pouring fire down into the valley. They hadn't seen her climb. Alina checked her rifle. Mk-12 Mod 1, designated marksman rifle, 18-inch barrel, match-grade ammunition, effective range 600 meters. She had qualified expert with it, but qualification was on a flat range with stationary targets. This was different. This was combat. This was real. She controlled her breathing. 4-count inhale, 4-count exhale. Her heart rate slowed. The adrenaline sharpened into focus. She found the first target. A man in a Pakal hat, AK-47, braced against a rock, firing down at Thorne's position. Distance, 180 meters. Wind, negligible. Elevation, minimal. She placed the reticle on his center mass. Exhaled halfway, squeezed. The rifle barked. The man dropped, one down. The other shooters hesitated, confused. Where had the shot come from? Alina was already moving, shifting to a new position before they could triangulate her location. She found the second target. Another man, this one with a PKM machine gun. He was sweeping fire across the valley floor, the muzzle flash strobing like a strobe light. Distance 210 meters. Wind, light left to right. Elevation, slight drop. She adjusted, squeezed. The rifle recoiled into her shoulder. The machine gunner slumped forward, the PKM going silent. 2 down. Now they knew. The remaining shooters turned, searching for her. She saw one of them point in her direction, shouting. Muzzle flashes erupted from the ridgeline, rounds chewing into the rocks around her position. She pressed herself flat, dirt and stone fragments exploding in her face. She couldn't stay here. They had her position. She had maybe 10 seconds before they concentrated fire and turned her cover into a death trap. Move or die. She scrambled backward, crawling on her elbows and knees, dragging her rifle. She found another position, higher up the ridge with a better angle. She could see 3 shooters now. They were repositioning, trying to flank her. She picked the closest one. Distance, 150 meters. No time for perfect mechanics. She fired, hit, 3 down. The 4th shooter saw her muzzle flash. He swung his rifle toward her, firing on full auto. Rounds cracked over her head. She didn't flinch. She tracked him through her optic. Calm, steady. Exhaled, fired. 4 down. The last shooter broke. He abandoned his position, running along the ridge, trying to escape. But there was nowhere to go. Alina tracked him, led him, accounted for his movement, squeezed. 5 down. The valley fell silent, the kind of silence that felt like the world holding its breath. Alina lay on the rocky slope, her rifle still pressed to her shoulder, scanning for additional threats. But there were none. The ambush was over. She keyed her radio. Her voice was hoarse, shaking slightly from the adrenaline crash. Thorne, northern ridge is clear. 5 enemy KIA, you're clear to move. There was a long pause. Then Thorne's voice came back, tight with something she couldn't quite identify. Relief, anger, disbelief. Copy, stand by for extraction. Alina lowered her rifle. She sat back against a rock, her hands trembling. She looked down at the valley floor. She could see Thorne's team moving now, securing the compound, checking for additional threats. Miller was on his feet, his arm bandaged but functional. They were alive, all of them. Because she had run, because she had defied orders, because she had calculated the math and decided that survival mattered more than obedience. She closed her eyes. The burn scar on her neck throbbed, the phantom heat of Aleppo mixing with the real heat of Afghanistan, but she was still here, still breathing, still moving. Fear is just data, process it and move. That's what she had written in Soto's locker, and now she had proven it, not just to them, but to herself. What does respect cost when it's given after you've already paid the price? The medevac helicopter was a controlled hurricane of noise and motion. Alina sat on the fold-down bench, her rifle between her knees, watching the medic work on Miller. The bullet had grazed his brachial artery. Not a kill shot, but close. Close enough that he'd be going home with a purple heart and a story about the girl who ran through a kill zone to save his life. Miller caught her looking. He held her gaze for a moment, then nodded, just once. A small, almost imperceptible gesture, but it said everything: respect, gratitude, acknowledgement. Alina nodded back. She didn't smile. There was nothing to smile about. They had survived. That was enough. Thorne sat across from her, silent, his face unreadable. He had been silent since the extraction, since the helicopter had pulled them out of the valley and left the bodies of 5 Taliban fighters scattered across the northern ridge. Silent through the debrief with the captain. Silent through the medical check where a corpsman examined Alina for injuries and found only bruises, dehydration, and a pack full of bullet holes. The helicopter banked hard, approaching Bagram airfield. The sprawling base spread out below them like a small city. Concrete, razor wire, the organized chaos of the war machine. They landed. The rotors spooled down. The medic helped Miller off the bird and the rest of the team followed. Alina grabbed her damaged pack and stepped onto the tarmac. The air was thick with jet fuel and dust. The sun was setting, painting the mountains in shades of purple and gold. Thorne waited for her. When the others had moved ahead, he stepped close, his voice low enough that only she could hear. That was the most reckless, insubordinate, tactically insane thing I've ever seen a soldier do. Alina met his eyes. Yes, sir. You disobeyed a direct order. You endangered yourself and potentially compromised the mission. Yes, sir. You also saved 5 lives, including mine. Alina didn't respond. She didn't know what to say. Thorne studied her, his expression still unreadable. I'm putting you in for a commendation, he said finally. Bronze Star with valor, you earned it. Alina shook her head. I don't want it, sir. Thorne frowned. Sergeant. With respect, I didn't do it for a medal. I did it because the math said someone was going to die if I didn't move. That's all. Thorne was quiet for a long moment. Then he exhaled, something that might have been frustration or might have been understanding. Report to the TOC at 800 tomorrow. We need to debrief properly. And Vance. Sir. Next time you decide to go rogue, at least give me a heads up. He turned and walked away, leaving Alina standing alone on the tarmac. She watched him go, then shouldered her ruined pack and headed toward the transient barracks. But she didn't make it far. Miller was waiting near the edge of the flight line, his arm in a fresh sling. He stepped into her path. Vance. She stopped. Miller. He looked uncomfortable, like a man trying to find words for something he'd never had to say before. I was wrong. About you. In the gym. On the patrol. All of it. Alina didn't respond. She just waited. You're not a liability, Miller continued. You're the fastest damn thing I've ever seen with a rifle, and I owe you my life. You don't owe me anything, Alina said. I was just doing my job. No, Miller's voice was firm. You did more than that. You did what the rest of us couldn't. And I want you to know if you ever need anything at all, you call me. I got your back." He extended his good hand. Alina looked at it for a moment, then shook it. His grip was strong, genuine. "Thanks, Miller." He nodded, then walked away. Alina continued toward the barracks, her mind numb, her body exhausted. She just wanted to sleep, to close her eyes and not dream about fire or bullets or the faces of men she had killed. But when she opened the door to her quarters, she found the entire team waiting for her. All 6 SEALs, standing in a loose circle, their expressions ranging from respect to admiration to something that looked like awe. Thorne stepped forward. "We wanted to do this before the official debrief, before the brass turns it into a dog and pony show." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, heavy object. It was a trident insignia, the Budweiser, the symbol of the Navy SEALs. "The guys want you on the team," Thorne said, "permanently. When you heal up, there's a spot on the manifest. No more attachment status. You're one of us." It was the highest honor he could offer: acceptance, brotherhood, a home. Alina looked at the gold trident. It glinted under the fluorescent lights. It represented everything she had trained for, everything she had fought for, a place where she belonged. And she couldn't take it. "I can't," she said quietly. Thorne frowned. "Why?" "Because you know now," she said. "You look at me and you see the scar, you see the fire, you see what I did on that ridge. And the next time we're in a kill box, you'll hesitate, you'll try to protect me. You'll second-guess the order because you feel like you owe me." She shook her head. "I can't work with people who worry about me, Lieutenant. I need to be expendable. That's how I operate." The room was silent. The SEALs exchanged glances, uncomfortable with the honesty. Thorne stared at her, searching for a crack in the armor. He found none. She was already gone, retreated behind the wall she had built 3 years ago. "I'm putting in a request for transfer," Alina continued. "Effective immediately. As soon as I'm fit for duty, I want a new assignment, different theater, different unit." "You're running again," Thorne said softly. "I'm maneuvering," she corrected. "There's a difference." Thorne sat in silence for a long minute. Then slowly he stood up. He picked up the trident from where he had placed it on the table and put it back in his pocket. He understood. He didn't like it, but he respected the tactical logic. "I'll sign the transfer," Thorne said, his voice heavy. "But for the record, Vance, you're wrong. You're not expendable." He turned to the door. The rest of the team followed, filing out one by one. Some of them nodded to her. Some of them said nothing. But they all looked at her differently now. And that was the problem. What do you carry when you leave everything behind? The zipper of the deployment bag hissed shut, a sound like a snake retreating into the grass. Alina stood in the center of the transient barracks room. It was 400 local time. The base was asleep, or as asleep as a war zone ever got. The distant hum of generators and the occasional roar of a jet engine were the only lullabies Bagram Airfield offered. She was dressed in clean fatigues, her left arm strapped tight against her chest in a black sling. The bullet that had punched through her pack had also clipped her shoulder. Not serious, just a graze, but enough to earn her a medical hold and a ticket out of country for evaluation. She looked around the room. It was stripped bare. No photos, no personal items, just the standard-issue furniture and the dust that managed to infiltrate even the sealed windows. It was as if she had never been there. That was the point. She slung her pack over her good shoulder. It was lighter than usual. Her armor and helmet were gone, left behind on that rocky ridge in the Pech Valley, likely picked clean by locals or recovered by a support team she would never meet. She walked to the door, then stopped. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, folded piece of paper. It was a page torn from her right in the rain notebook. She wasn't leaving it for Thorne. Thorne understood the calculus. He knew why she had to go. They had said everything that needed to be said. She walked to the small desk in the corner where the unit mail was collected. She found the slot marked Soto, the young radio operator who had frozen when the ambush started, who had looked at her with wide, terrified eyes when the mortars started walking in. Alina placed the note in his slot. She didn't write a speech. She didn't write about heroism or duty. She wrote the only thing that had saved her when the fire came. Fear is just data, process it and move. V. She turned and walked out. The hallway was empty, bathed in the red glow of the tactical lighting. She moved silently, her boots making no sound on the linoleum. She passed the door to Team 7's bay. She could hear the faint sounds of sleeping men, the snoring, the shifting of bed frames. For a second her hand hovered over the doorframe. She could stay. She could walk in there, wake them up, and let them buy her a beer. She could let them slap her on the back and tell her she was one of them. She could have a family. The burned scar on her neck prickled, not with pain, but with warning. Family is something you can lose. Ghosts can't be hurt. She dropped her hand. She kept walking. The flight line was a hive of activity under the floodlights. A C-130 Hercules sat on the tarmac, its rear ramped down like a gaping mouth, swallowing pallets of cargo, and a line of sleepy soldiers rotating out of country. The air smelled of JP-8 jet fuel and unburnt hydrocarbons. It was the smell of her nightmares, the smell of the Aleppo fire. But as Alina inhaled the cold dawn air, she didn't flinch. She didn't hold her breath. She let the smell fill her lungs, acknowledging it, then exhaling it. It was just a smell. It wasn't the monster anymore. She handed her manifest to the loadmaster, a burly Air Force sergeant with a clipboard. Vance Alina, Sergeant, he read, checking the list. He looked up at her, then at her sling. Medical transfer. Administrative, Alina corrected. Just a ride. He looked at her for a second longer, sensing there was more to the story, but the look in her eyes stopped him from asking. Grab a seat on the web. We're wheels up in 20. Alina walked up the ramp. The interior of the C-130 was a cavern of noise and vibration. She found a spot near the wheel well, wedged between a pallet of MREs and a generator. She sat down, buckling the strap across her waist with her one good hand. She leaned her head back against the vibrating fuselage. Through the small porthole window opposite her, she could see the sun beginning to crest over the Hindu Kush. The mountains were jagged purple teeth biting into the orange sky. Somewhere out there, in a valley that didn't have a name on most maps, there was a ridge with 10 brass casings and a bloodstain that would dry and fade in the sun. The engines roared to life, a deepening whine that shook her bones. The ramp closed, sealing out the mountains, sealing out the war. Alina closed her eyes. She wasn't running away. Running away meant you were afraid of what was behind you. She wasn't afraid. She had faced the fire and walked out the other side. She was just moving to the next position. The plane taxied, lurching forward. The gravity pushed her back into the seat as the pilot applied full throttle. The wheels left the ground. Alina Vance let out a long, slow breath. The scar on her neck felt cool. The treadmill had stopped. She was gone. And somewhere in the mathematics of survival, in the cold calculus of war, a truth remained. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is keep moving when the world tells you to stay. Sometimes survival isn't about belonging. It's about knowing when to run toward the fire and when to walk away from the ashes. Alina didn't need a medal. She didn't need acceptance. She didn't need anyone to remember her name. She just needed to know that when the math said move, she moved. And that was enough.